My name is Mike Kavasiv. I'm an assistant chief here at the police department. I've been here for about 29 years now. Most of my career has been in investigations, overseeing different aspects of the homicide areas. So the older cases and the cold cases are definitely near and dear to my heart. Approximately 9 years ago, when Chief Holloway took over the reins of the police department, one of the things that he wanted to provide accountability for within the police department was making sure that we remember the victims of homicides, that cases we weren't always able to resolve or close as we were initially investigating them. So he put together a cold case group. We have two detectives. I'd like to bring them forward and they can sit up here with me, Detective Pavelski and Detective Etchinson. The two have been instrumental in making sure that they keep the memory alive for individuals that were taken far too soon. So they put a lot of great effort into reviewing these cases today, and also with looking over and making sure we have accountability. So I'm going to go over two cases. The first is going to be from 1997, and the other one is going to be from 1969. The first one is near and dear to me, is a case that occurred in May of 1997. And Richard Evans. He was 18 years old at the time. He was taken so untimely from us. I was a brand new patrol officer at the time. And the reason why I remember is I was one of the first officers on scene, and I was there when Richard was passing away. And I remember the scene, I remember a great deal about it, and I remember the detectives coming in and trying to provide resolution for the family, which just never came. And so Richard was shot once in the chest. He died at 3400 block of 22nd Avenue South, and the case went cold very quickly. We were able to get a very, very detailed description of the subject at that time that was responsible for taking his life, including mannerisms and a description of who did it, but it never materialized. It never really went anywhere, and after a year or two, it just went cold. One of the things that is also near and dear to me, and I reached out to his mother about a decade ago, was we wanted to remember our fallen victims, that we had a place on our website to make sure we had accountability to where families can go and make sure that they were remembered. And she was one of the first individuals I reached out to get a picture. We didn't want to use driver's license pictures. We didn't want to use low-grade pictures. We wanted to use a picture that was important to the family members. So we reached out. She provided me that photo, and if you go to our webpage, it went back to the mid-'90s. We have 100% accountability for all the older cases that go back on the 90s, but that was one of the things that we brought forward to try to kind of get that in. So that's why it's near and dear to me that we were able to kind of bring that forward. I'll let, after you have an opportunity to speak with the mother as well, Richard's name, he went by his family, they called him Juicy. I'll let her provide that story. It's kind of a funny story. It's something the family should be able to share. So I'm going to look at a couple notes to make sure I stay on track. But the suspect in Juicy's case was recently identified through forensics evidence that was taken at the scene. This was important to us because it provides the comfort and the closure that the family needed to be able to say who took their son's life. One of the things that makes this a little trickier, though, is the suspect at the time was only 15 years old. And had passed away within the last year or two. We have shared that information with the family. We have shared the information on who we felt is responsible. We're not going to publicly provide that information today, but that's something as we provide the police reports and the closure of that. This is also to highlight the case as well, but to be able to kind of get that forensics evidence, to know that there's an individual behind the face that took Richard so soon, Juicy so soon, is important for us to be able to kind of provide that comfort to them. But he was 18 years old when he was taken. He was shot to death in the alley on 3400 block of 22nd Avenue South. And like I said, when the detectives provide a final review of the case, we're going to sit down again with the family. We'll provide them reports. But again, this is also to highlight it and also to provide any information that people want to come forward on years later to be able to do that. But again, we have identified the suspect was 15 years of age and has passed away. We just don't feel like publicly it's something that we should be pushing out because of the nuances of that. But to be able to provide that resolution is extremely important to us. So I'd like to thank the family members for showing up today, Juicy's mom and aunt. They obviously have never forgotten, and it's important to them, and it's important to us to make sure that this is something that we can bring forward to. And this was also an opportunity for us to bring attention to our cold case unit to highlight these two cases. Okay, the second case that I'd like to, and I'll take some questions afterwards, and I encourage also anyone that would like to speak to the family members as well, please do so when we're done. That way you can have a little opportunity to kind of know a little bit more about our victims. The second case I'd like to talk about occurred in 1969. This is a case that has perplexed the department. For a long time, it was thought to be the oldest cold case that we had on the department. We now know that we have a few from 1962 and 1964 through our cold case efforts. But in 1969, this was always known as the Trunk Lady case. Ironically, when we started doing the research, I wanted to find out if the original case detectives were still around. And I'd like to point out that Detective Paul Drolet, 87 years of age. Sorry I called you out on that. But Paul is the original case detective in 1969 that worked on this case. This was his assignment, as well as several others that were there at the time. Bill Carlisle was the sergeant at the time, and they put a great deal of effort in trying to resolve this matter. I'm going to kind of read off a couple notes to stay on track, and then I'll go touch on a few other areas. So on Halloween Day, 1969, a little over 53 years ago, detectives and officers were sent out to the 4200 block of 32nd Street South. At the time, it was called the Oyster Bar. Now it's just a church that's located at that location. When they got there, they noticed this trunk that was in the field. Two juveniles observed two white male subjects pull up in a pickup truck, place the trunk into the field, and then leave. Officers arrived on scene. They opened up the trunk, and they found a body of a female inside the trunk, wrapped in plastic. One of the things, and it's totally different with investigative techniques now than then, Paul and his investigators, they were stuck with writing letters to agencies, to making phone calls to agencies, trying to find out who has a missing person, who has someone that could look is a demographic that would be similar to the female that we found that day in 1969. And after years of trying, it just never got any traction. Theories abound, and unfortunately, they never were able to identify them. In 2010, we wanted to start identifying some of our Jane Does and John Does. In this case, the victim was buried as a Jane Doe in the cemetery off of 49th Street up at the Kansas City-Pinellas Park border, and there she was till 2010. In 2010, we had her exhumed. We attempted to get DNA from her remains. Unfortunately, that just didn't happen. It was too degraded, and again, the case went cold. Over the years, multiple different news outlets have touched upon it, and it was something that we just weren't able to think we were ever going to get any resolution on it. So late last year, earlier this year, the detectives in this case went through it again. And that is one of the things I want to highlight with the cold cases. It takes persistence. It takes going back and looking at things that may not have been available to individuals back in 1969, but more importantly, when we're looking at things in 2010, what could we have missed? And the detectives noticed that there was a section of hair that had not been tested, and we sent it to a private lab. When the hair sample was sent to the private lab, we were finally able to get a DNA profile. And that's only a step. That's a stepping stone on that. After we were able to get that DNA profile, Otham Labs was able to then run it through a DNA genealogy database. And after 53 years, the Trunk Lady finally has a name. We were able to do quite a bit of research as well through with the DNA hit, and we were able to locate some of her family members. So I'd like to point out, it's no longer any longer the Trunk Lady. Her name is Sylvia June Atherton. Sylvia June Atherton, she was killed when she was 41 years of age. She left behind 5 children, and she was from the Tucson, Arizona area. One of the things that we've been able to stitch together is there are really no St. Petersburg ties. She left the Tucson area with a number of her children. had left 2 of them with a previous husband in Chicago, and then was never seen again by her children. We have her daughter Cylin on the Zoom today. She was a child when her mother went missing and had not known the whereabouts of her mother for the past 53 years. So through their investigative techniques, we were able to kind of get some of the names together. And this is more of a thing, we don't have the resolution on who killed her yet. This is where like amateur sleuths will come in. This is where we're asking for assistance to kind of put the pieces together and the gaps together. We do know that this trunk was their property. We do know that she was remarried. We do know that her husband at the time passed away in 1999 and never listed her as missing. We do know that he never listed her on any bankruptcy records. So you can see there's some inferences there that we have to kind of fill in the gaps. But mainly we wanted to bring forward the fact is she has a name now after 53 years. Her family does have the closure. And that's the closure that we're trying to bring forward. These are the steps. Just like with Juicy's family, the closure that we need to bring forward, we may not always be able to bring an arrest forward, but we need to be able to show that we still care. And we need to be able to kind of bring forward our efforts on doing so. So I'll take a few questions. I know I kind of bounced around a little bit, and then we'll definitely slide. I encourage, not only if you have any questions for the case detectives that picked it up, but Detective Drolet that came down, as well as family members that are here present, as well on Zoom, how you would like to break that down and how you'd like to be able to kind of touch on those cases.
When did St. Pete Police Department, your department specifically in the missing persons, start using forensic testing?
So we've utilized mostly Florida Department of Law Enforcement for the better half of a decade, if not a little bit longer. We started using the Pinellas County Lab after that, because Pinellas County, we are fortunate to have our own lab here in Pinellas County. It does have some limitations. In this case is why we had to use a private lab. But for the most part, we have a phenomenal relationship not only with our lab locally here, but with also the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. So the better half of at least a decade or two that we've been able to utilize DNA testing, being able to kind of work through it. That wasn't always available, obviously, with the original case detectives in these cases.
And to the outside world, it may seem, well, why don't you just do testing, right? Why don't you just do DNA testing? Is it that easy or no?
For us to be able to send that information out? Well, it shows you the challenge that we faced, because when we exhumed the victim's body in 2010, it was too degraded at that time. We couldn't get DNA from any of the remains, so we were able to find one other section that we were able to kind of go in that direction. But you can see it's just not easy, especially with the older cases. DNA wasn't thought of. Preservation of evidence necessarily wasn't as well thought of on the way we do things today. We have touch DNA. We have regular DNA that comes through bodily fluids. 15, 20 years ago, that was never even thought of. And and if it was prohibited because we couldn't send it out to private labs to be able to do that. Now we're able to work with our partners here and be able to take care of that.
In the Richard Evans case, the fingerprint that you guys tied to the suspect in this case, was that fingerprint pulled when this was originally investigated or when it was recently revisited?
So it was pulled when it was originally investigated, but the suspect in this matter had not been arrested. So we didn't have a fingerprint to compare it to, and was not arrested until a number of years later, which is important. And that's one of the things I wanted to highlight, is because when the case goes cold, they may not get looked at again. So when the detectives are able to then pull back up, they're able to resubmit and go over evidence that somebody might have missed the first time or wasn't available for a DNA hit at that point, or a fingerprint hit in this case.
The genealogy test that the Texas lab uses, is that kind of like 23andMe, or like, what does that look like?
That was a question I was asking and trying to get resolution for. I wasn't exactly sure what genealogy. That's why I highlighted as Autham Labs, but that's something we can get with you. I don't have that information. We were trying to figure that out on Friday, to be honest with you.
For sure, yeah, I just figured with all those popularity of those tests, people are just interested in like how you actually go down the path of.
I was too.
Yeah.
So that was one of the questions that I had too. So
So as a follow-up to that, would one of her family members need to have been in a database for them to locate a family member?
yes.
Obviously how that works.
So initially we had a DNA hit on her son, and we were able to find other family members, which is important too, because we've only found 2 of her family members. There are still 2 others we'd like to track down, her adult daughter and also the child that she had with her husband. We don't know the whereabouts of either one of them. It's difficult because you're trying to retrack something from 53 years ago, and it's not as easy as the Google searches as today. So marriages, changes, even name changes as we go, those are the tough parts that we need to kind of put together.
How many cold cases are currently open here within the department?
We average about 200 open murder cases that go back to the early 1960s. We have 3 or 4 missing persons cases, and then they also do touch upon some of the older sexual battery cases as well. That number has stayed consistent for the better half of 20 years. We usually are able to close, a few every year, and then we have had a really good closure rate with homicides the past 4 or 5 years. So luckily, those cases have not gone onto their desks, and they continue to work at the older cases. But that number has stayed stagnant. When I was a homicide detective, it was right around 206 to 212. I think we're about 220 right now.
How many are on that team working it? Is it just
The 2 of them.
Just
It's the 2 of them.
Hundreds of
That's what they do. That's what they do. That is what they do. They peel it back. And then during time with some of our other detectives, if they'd like to as invest some of the time in as well, this is the opportunity. And these are the faces, too, where people can call in, because we never really had that. It was worked part-time. It was one of the cases that people would call in, and you would just get a detective and say, okay, I'll try to dust the book off and see what I can do in between that. We've invested the resources in to be able to do that, and that's why we're able to bring some of this forward. Because at the point that you brought about the fingerprint on the bicycle, it may have stayed for another 10 years, and we would have known. If it hadn't been for pulling back and saying, listen, I need to take a minute, I need to look at something, did somebody miss something? And those are really what we need to do, because it's no fault of their own. Detectives retire, detectives move on, cases come in and we get hits later on. And if we don't have the ability to kind of look at that, it loses something. So they get to do that full time.
So this 15-year-old suspect was later incarcerated, and that's how his print came to be notified?
Correct. He was arrested for something later on, and that's how the print made it in the system.
Was he himself later a victim of a crime? Or
No,
natural causes?
it was natural causes, correct. I should say natural, but something that was not homicidal. All right, well, good. Well, I appreciate it. What I'd like for everybody to do is please take a moment. I don't know how, Yolanda, if you could please come up, you best to do it. We can even have somebody go in the side room if we need to. But I encourage, Detective Drolet came down, he lives in Clearwater now. Came down, and he would love to be able to talk about it. We have Juicy's family here, and then Cylin is on the Zoom, and I'll let Yolanda try to figure out the best way to handle that.
I think we can start with the Zoom interview with Cylin Gates. She's coming to us from California, and we have the technology working right now, so I think it would be a good idea to talk to her first, and then we'll talk to Juicy's family afterwards. Okay, so Cylin, they can see and hear you. So I'm going to have, if any of the reporters would like to ask a question, go ahead.
Hi, Cylin. My name is Vanessa Ariza. I'm with ABC here in Tampa. Just for the record, could you spell your first and last name for all of us, please?
Sure, Cylin, S is in Sam, Y-L-L-E-N, last name Gates, J-T-E-S. Can you hear me?
Yes, we're trying to get better clarity to hear you. Is there a malt box, or?
Yeah, we're trying to.
Speakers just come out through here. Do you guys want to use your, or come
Okay, Cylin, we're going to try to put the microphones closer to the. We've never done this before in a live press conference, so we're all kind of learning from this.
Thank you.
can just ask you if you don't mind speaking up too, because that will help with the speakers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, is that better, guys?
Do the speakers go any louder?
Can you hear me better? I can speak up a little bit if that helps.
That does help. That does help quite a bit.
Okay. Shall I spell my name one more time?
They have the spelling of your name. It's in the paperwork that I handed out.
Okay.
I would do it again for.
Oh, they want to get a mic check, so if you could do it one more time, please, if you could spell it.
Sure. It's Celine, S as in Sam, Y-L-L-E-N. Last name Gates, G-A-T-E-S.
All right, Celine, thank you for your patience. How old were you when your mother went missing?
My mother left Tucson. I was about 5 years old at the time. She left in 1965 and disappeared with my younger sister, who was only 4 years old or 3 years old at the time, and my older sister, who was 19, and her husband, and they also had a baby that was about the same age as my sister, Kimberly. This adds to my interest, of course, of my mother disappearing, but of finding my two sisters.
How has it been through those decades, not knowing where your mother was, and then to receive that phone call to get a finality of it?
Well, it was shocking because it had been so many years, and we had no idea what happened to her. She did leave with another brother that she left in Chicago, as the officer mentioned, just about 6 months after they left Arizona. And so he came back to Tucson. But we thought we would hear from them at some time, but, you know, life goes on. I was young and growing up, and I tried a few times to try to find her, but there was just nothing. It had gone cold. So it is a relief, a sad relief that finally found her. And she was, you know, of course, this terrible way to die just a few years after she left the state. So.
Have you heard about this case prior to learning that this was in fact your mother?
Never, and it was so shocking. We had no idea, none whatsoever. The whole family, my brothers, two brothers, were shocked. It's a big surprise, but in a way it's a comfort. Well, you wonder why she never tried to contact us in all these years. You would think, gosh, she would have tried to reach out or something. And I went on Ancestry in hopes to locating two sisters, figuring my mother, because of age, probably would have passed by then. So we've been trying to find a sister that was only 4 or 5 years older than my older sister these many years, thinking Ancestry would help. What did happen is we found another brother that my mother had. It's quite a story in itself. And he knew he had been put up for adoption. It was in between having older children and then right before she had us. So it's a very, very strange story. My mother's life is quite strange.
You mentioned that your older sister had a husband and a child.
Yes.
Is there any contact with them, or are they also unable to be found?
Unable to be found, and that's what's so curious is my brother got a call back around 68 or 69 from the St. Petersburg, Florida area, which was my sister, but she just left a message with a grandparent. She thought he'd been killed in the Vietnam War. This is such a tangled web. I don't know how deep to get into this, but she found out that he wasn't dead. So I know she was in the St. Petersburg, Florida area at that time. That's the only time we've ever heard of that area. But what's surprising is, why did she report my mother? My mother's missing, or what happened to my younger sister, who was only 4 at the time? What happened to her? Both of them, we've not heard from any of them.
And now, as investigators are asking for anybody to share additional information on this case and their new findings, what's your hope through all of that?
Yeah, of course, I think number one is we would like the case to be solved. You know, we'd like to find out who did this. Also to find my sisters. I mean, the younger one was only 4 years old. I mean, of course, we're concerned that what's happened to them, because why haven't they reached out? I went on Ancestry years ago when Ancestry allowed this type of information, and another brother, we went on it right away in hopes that we could find them. It was the only way we could, excuse me, try to find them. So that's my hopes, is maybe this gets out, maybe they'll hear, and maybe we can locate them.
It sounds like you've done some work on Ancestry.com or some of those, platforms, and obviously that might have played a role in this. I guess, what's been your end of that and your experience with Ancestry.com, or something like that?
Well, I think it's more Detective Wally, I'll call him Wally, I have a hard time pronouncing his name. He's the one that did all of this. He's the one that contacted us. I just want to thank him so much. He's been great. We had to do some special things with the DNA, sending it to that lab, my DNA, to confirm, because there's only limited information. He did that right away, kind of walked us through this and given us this opportunity. And thank you all too, to try to get the word out, to see if we might be able to find our sisters or what happened to them, and maybe solve this case. Along with this other family, I send my condolences to them too. I know how it feels. So,
All right.
that's our, thank you.
So Len, thank you for joining us. Sorry, it looks like we're about to run out of time on this Zoom call. We apologize for that. We're trying to see if we can, okay. I don't know if you want, I know this was hard for you. Can you repeat the last thing you said, because we missed it because of the technology?
Sure, I just hope that, thank you all for getting this information out. I give my condolences to this sweet family that's on this, that's feeling the same feelings I'm having with a loved one that was killed and gone too soon. But if you hear anything, please share my information, and I just thank you. We can just get the word out, try to locate my sisters. It would be a blessing to my family, an end to this ordeal.
And one thing I'll touch on, she's agreed to do any other video interviews afterwards. So if you want to contact, reach out, we'll give you the Zoom information. And if you want to be able to do a one-on-one or something later on, we can try to get that information to you.
Thank you, Ms. Gates. We thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so now we have Ms. Clarkson. His aunt, if you want to introduce yourself, ma'am.
I'm Sabrina Bird, Richard's aunt.
You have to get a little bit closer. Yeah, give them a second to, yes, absolutely. Catherine with a C, CatherinE, Clarkson, common spelling. And ma'am, if you can.
And I'm Sabrina Bird, his aunt,
Bird, B-Y-R-D?
B-Y-R-D.
Okay. Right. They want to ask you some questions once they get set.
As soon as you guys are set, I would like to bring up Detective Drolette before we close down, just to give him an opportunity. It'd be nice to be able to hear from him too.
Is everybody set? How are you two doing, 26 years later, getting the information you guys recently received?
It's like a load lifted,
I'm very grateful. I'm
and
very grateful. Right?
justice has been served for my family.
It closed a lot in our heart. When my son left us, it's like, oh, he was the life of the party.
Yes,
He brought a lot of tears to St. Pete.
yes, yes.
He had over 2,000 people to his funeral.
Well-known, very
Over
well-known,
2,000.
very respectable.
And we miss him,
Gave to the community. He was
gave
just,
to the community. He took care of the kids.
yes,
He had
That's
three
for them.
He had 3 sons of his own. I have great grandkids now. He have grandchildren. We lost one of his sons 5 years ago. He had a son to die too. Same way, same age, everything.
Yes.
Gun violence is the cheering with the guns,
When they're just gonna end.
you know. And I'm very grateful. I am.
You said Juicy was the life of the party.
Yes.
Is all the nicknames?
Anytime you see him, they go Jew boy. We call him Jew boy and
Yes.
Juicy, you know. He was never called Richard. If you call him Richard, he won't know.
He wasn't gonna
He
answer.
wasn't gonna answer.
How did we get the Juicy nickname?
Oh, God.
My brother, God rest his soul too. And by the way, he have lost so many family members during the 26 years. My brother gave him this name. He kept a wet shirt. He was a slobber, so we stuck with him from 6 months till the day he left us. And we still say
Call him
Juicy.
Juicy. Yes, ma'am.
Nobody say Richard.
How was it when you received that call from detectives saying, we have found the person who did this?
Well, she received the call. I was proceeding to the gas station in the area where he got shot, and I seen a couple of his friend guys, and I'm like, "What's wrong?" He said, "He gone, auntie." I said, "Who's gone?" He said, "Jew boy." I said, "No, he just left from with us watching the football game. He rode the bicycle. He was right down the road from us. He rode the bicycle to where he found deceased at." And his other friend guy pulled up. He said, "Auntie, look." I seen nothing but the news team. And he said, "He's gone for real." I forgot what I was supposed to go into the store to get. I went back to the house and let my family know. When I got back to my mom's house, she was walking across the street. And I asked, "Was it for real?" And
I just asked the Lord not to let him suffer. Because
Yes.
If he'd have made it to surgery, he would have been a vegetarian. Because he had lost too much oxygen. So I asked the Lord not to let him suffer. So he took him, you know. So.
To finally have
Closure.
that closure, how is it
I
moving
am
forward?
so grateful because I thought I was going, I'm 65. I thought I was going to leave this world not knowing who took my child's life.
yes,
Because I realized it wasn't a friend. They didn't know each other. Because I could have had one of them doubts like I did. I said it was a friend. You know, everybody was so close, and when he left, everybody changed. There was no more boys. We used to call them the boys. There was
Yes.
no more nothing. He was
he was the
guy.
life for
He
everything
was
for
the guy,
them.
and he was the youngest.
And yes, and it just like,
He was a true friend. If you met him, you would have met him, you would have loved him. He was
Yes.
loved by all. Nobody that's not like Juicy. Nobody. Everybody. You still get a smile on people's face when you say
yes,
Juicy.
yes.
Yes.
We
Like
just did a
today-
balloon release. Oh my God.
Today, you all brought a lot of smiles.
Yes,
I'm telling you. Today, y'all really, really close a real deep in our heart. For
Yes.
real. For real. And I thank you all very, very much. I am very grateful. I'm very grateful. That's all I
thanks to
can
the
say.
St. Petersburg Police
Police
Department.
Department. I am
Thank you
very
so
grateful.
much.
To have this closure. And thank you.
We'll make them available
Thank you.
afterwards.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you so
Thank
much. Thank you.
One last thing I'd like to do is Detective Drollet. And Wally and Etch.
And Detective Drolet worked on Sylvia Aberdone's case. But they both worked on both cases.
I'm gonna bring all three of them up real quick, because you may have some questions on how they used to do things back in the 60s, but how they used to do things today. So they're the face of the cold case today, and thank you, Paul.
Thank
And
you.
I'm gonna give you a few minutes to step out.
I'm the old and this is
Other
the
side?
new.
Okay.
So you're flanking him? Yeah. Thank you.
Back in the 60s, we had a kind of a touch-and-go police agency. This was not a real professional police agency at the time. But today, because all of this is done, it's remarkable. These guys we're doing what I wish I could have done years ago, before I retired. But I'm going to pick their brains when we get done. I'm just, my mind's going in circles here.
I'm sure they're going to pick your brain as well.
Oh, yeah, well, I don't have much left, you know, but,
Detective, how does it feel to finally see a sense of closure? Not completely, but a
Right.
sense to this.
it just, when the chief came and knocked on my door and said, "Oh, we finally found you," and I said, "My God, what do I do now?" But he said, "Do you remember the lady in the trunk?" I said, "Yeah." He said she'd been positively identified, and I think I used the words, "You got to be kidding me," but it may have been a little bit differently. But it was a real surprise to me, and I can't get over it. I just can't get over it after all these years.
Could you explain a bit to us some of the obstacles you faced when you were working here and investigating these cases?
I'm sorry?
Could you explain to us a little bit of the obstacles you faced with technology and investigating these cases?
Okay. The technology was whoever I could reach on the telephone and whoever I could reach by paperwork. The media took up the story at the time, but it wasn't much to offer because we didn't have much to offer them. No DNA, no nothing like that, nothing technical. We sent flyers out to all major police agencies in the country, and I wish I'd have heard from Arizona back then, but it just went nowhere. Everything we tried to do got nowhere, and that's very frustrating. But then it went on and on. Now, in answer to your story, we had nothing. We had nothing but us, and there was very few of us to work these cases, and we were overwhelmed because when you got started on this case, here comes another case, you know? We only had 4 detectives at the time in the homicide unit. So I thank these guys, and I thank the city of St. Petersburg to finally get a professional outfit. And I look forward to working with them as much as I can. Maybe on some other cases. I got some other cases that have been open too.
Were you on the scene that day when the trunk was discovered in that?
I was
field?
called.
Could you talk about that?
I was called to the scene as the investigating detective. And yes, I remember the trunk well when it was, but yes, I was the first detective, the second detective on the scene, I'm sorry. Sergeant Carlisle was there first, and he called me. And I went over and we started our investigation from that point on.
Were there any details about this case that have stuck with you over all the years?
Just the fact that she was never identified. You know, that's the base. You get identification, you got something you can work with, but you got nothing when you have nothing. And that's very frustrating.
Talking about identification, this case has been known for decades as the trunk girl, the trunk lady, and now you have a name. What just kind of relief, because this was a victim here and now has that name, that they're not going to be referred to as the trunk lady anymore, that this case can actually have a name to it.
I'm very happy she has a name, that she's been identified. My goodness, who'd have thought this? You know, never, 53 years, what the heck? You go on with life, you know, you don't go back too far unless something draws your attention. And boy, this was attention getter right here. It's great. I have a real sense of relief because of the work that these guys put in and what the conclusion was.
What years did you work at St. Pete PD?
1958 through 1978. You were born then?
72, does that count?
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you much. That's about it.
so much.
Good.
Thank you.
Sir, say your name again for me? Tell me
They're
his name is spelled.
Paul Drolet.
Drolet.
Thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
All right, this concludes our press conference.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, anybody more than glad to talk about anything.